Happy Monday. It is September 9th, 2024. It's a little after noon, 12 o'clock Central Standard Time, my time. And on screen, we're actually going to start at the bottom of the screen with the ticker because my short-term stock price factors and the short watch has been ongoing for me for a very long time. But my three kind of focal points are trade volume, fails to deliver, and sentiment. This video, and actually what I want to do over the next few days is kind of gauge sentiment and track sentiment a little bit with respect to NIO and NIO stock. The first two things, the trade volume and the FTDs, the fails to deliver, we can cover a little bit in this video, but I've also been covering them at length. So without further ado, let's start with the first, trade volume. Trade volume has been elevated ever since NIO had earnings. That was this past Thursday before the market opened, and we saw big trade volume upticks for NIO stock. You know what? Let's do this. A brief recap for those who don't know, or maybe who are new to the channel. This is the time frame where NIO stock, and this is its entire history in the U.S. market since it's been traded, and this is the time frame. The yellow shows the price action. That's when NIO stock really ran. Two things were going on that were pretty evident to me looking back at that time frame. We had fails to deliver that are depicted by the white lines. Those dropped off significantly during that time. And we also had elevated trade volume levels. And what I mean by that is I remember a lot of days seeing 80 million to 100 million shares traded day over day, pretty consecutively or consistently during this time frame. So I think part of that sentiment does play in. And that's why I want to also talk about sentiment, because it's tough to gauge or track all these things. Certainly in real time, fails to deliver are, for example, lagged data. We never get real-time access to them. However, that's one of the things I've been talking about for months now. And I said, especially when we saw this 5 million spike and over 6 million in the same week that we had almost 3.5 million. And then most recently at the beginning of August, we had 2 days back to back where there were about 5.5 million shares, I think it was, that couldn't be located. So that's when naked shorting could have been going on. So again, is this going to be some kind of alignment like what we saw back here before the stock price took off? Are we actually seeing the beginning of that? I don't know, but we're going to keep tracking things so that if this ends up being a short squeeze, and those of us, especially who are long-term investors like me, want to just sit by and enjoy watching this happen and play out, I think it'll be kind of fun and enjoyable to do that as a community. So with that, now let's talk about the trade volume for today. For example, as I said earlier, it's a little afternoon and we have almost 80 million shares traded already, over 78 million shares. The stock price is up over 10%, almost 11% right now as I'm recording this. And FYI, if you're curious, I woke up at, 4:30 a.m. my time, Central Standard Time, and I kind of looked to see what NIO stock was doing, and it was showing as being about $4.83. And then, of course, there could have maybe been some selling pressure initially. Maybe that's the algos, the high frequency trading algos that we've perhaps seen in recent months trying to push the stock price down to start the day. But I don't know if the volume was just too much, or there's just, maybe we're getting that sentiment shift. Maybe it's the fails to deliver. Maybe shorts are having to cover. And you know what? On that note, let's actually shift and move over, because when I saw this is, I think two things are in play here. This was Sunday night when I saw this, and I actually retweeted it because what stood out to me is Marcel Munch on Sunday had put out this tweet, but what I was amazed at was it had 27,500 views. And so I kind of looked back over his recent tweets, and most of them weren't getting that kind of traction or action with the views. And so I thought, okay, maybe this is an indicator of sentiment. Even my retweet has gotten over 1,100 views at this time, much more than my videos have been getting on this platform. Twixters, what I call it. And so here's another example of that. My tweet from this morning, earlier this morning, was I saw right away big volume for NIO stock. And of course, I'm like, are we watching or seeing shorts get torched here? Is it too early for that? I don't know. We'll keep tracking the data. I think bigger picture, longer term, we'll be able to look back and laugh and kind of joke about whether or not that was happening and whether we got to see an actual short squeeze. But 445 views is all I've gotten on that, even though I've pinned it. And maybe this is why. All right, full disclosure, I finally blocked him. I had him muted before, but I just, the fact that NIO seems to be catching a lot of attention, that there's obvious buying pressure going on. There's a lot of trade volume. The FTDs have been elevated. There's just a lot going on. And yet I would think that I would see it trending when I'm on that platform, and I don't. So I just kind of said, all right, you know what? Let me just take you and put you in a box and put you over on the shelf. But this is the other thing I saw this morning. So, and sorry, now I'm a little random with the tangent, but again, sentiment check. I am not usually checking in with any of his channels, and I don't know if this is only his live streams, but I happened to jump onto his live stream because I wanted to see if other people were talking about NIO. And I know he had been pretty negative about NIO in the past. And so when he was actually on his live stream, he pulled up Jim Cramer, who was talking, and Jim Cramer said something about his wife had test driven a NIO in Italy. And somebody double check that and make sure I heard that right. And he was complimentary, said she loved it. And so he's kind of like, I wonder, if in the future these Chinese EVs come over to the US and really make waves. And it was funny because Kevin was sitting there kind of shaking his head, and he said, oh, well, that's battery swapping or something like that. And I thought, okay, this is a great observation. Like for me, it's all about observing. I don't, everybody's going to have their opinion, but I'm wondering about sentiment, awareness, understanding who has a certain view. And for example, people who used to think that streaming would never make it, I just wonder, what do they think about it now? When something truly innovative, disruptive, and different like battery swapping is new, I don't expect everyone to accept it. At what point do we see a major shift with respect to that? That's my thinking. So again, the sentiment shift will be ongoing. Here's the other thing, and I want to point this out because those who know me know that I kind of pay attention to certain things. And Alibaba, I've talked about before. In fact, there was a point at which there was some debate within the NIO community. Some people thought that NIO should do a stock buyback. The reason I didn't want NIO to do a stock buyback is I was looking at Alibaba, and they have been doing stock buybacks, and this is a very profitable company, but it's also a company that continues to get perhaps naked shorted, fails to deliver, continue to be elevated with them. So as I'm watching Brendan Ahern, who is a professional in the industry, who is very well versed and familiar with the Chinese market, and his frustration is ongoing with Alibaba, this was my response to him. And basically, I'm like, hey, all we can do is check this data. But I like that he's honing in a little bit and getting a little specific with this. But this is my response. I bookmark this, and this is his sort of reference to the trade volume and what he saw with this buyback versus actual trade volume and that sort of thing. So I'm just like, okay, hey, in 30 days or so, we'll get the data on the FTDs. I want to look back on this and see how it shapes up, if we can see any trends, anything that's obvious, because for me, it's all about research, continuing to try and learn and educate myself. But it starts with, and I have it at the top of the screen for a reason on my profile here, is it's become aware. If I'm not aware of something, then how can I have any understanding of it? And so Brendan, I don't know if he's unaware, completely disconnected from the FTDs that are playing out, but for a very profitable company like Alibaba to get naked shorted potentially, and for folks to not have that awareness, I just think, well, this is something worth watching. So I talked about it recently in the last month or so in some of my videos, and it will be something I'll continue to track and monitor, because if we see it do something crazy, like if we see that big trade volume, sort of like what we're seeing with NIO now, and then we see an obvious uptrend start, that's when things could get interesting, especially if there are continued elevated fails to deliver levels on it. So I wanted to kind of mention that. And wow, I talked a lot longer than I meant. So I'm going to cut this thing off. But short term, I want to hear from others. What do you think sentiment is? And this is going to be kind of fun for me over the next couple of days. I'm going to just pop in and move around on different people's channels. And some of the folks, Atta the Odd Investor, I'll probably go over there. Mr. P, his channel. Eric G, maybe I'll go by Felix or Triple M, I think is what they call him, or some of these others, and just stop through and take a look at the comments section and see what it looks like sentiment wise. I'm really curious about that. Let me check in one last time on this. Yeah, I'm still not quite 80 million shares as I'm finishing up this recording. We are at 556. That's the stock price, still 10, almost 11% up on the day. Have a great day. I'll see you all again very soon.